How about this one? What if my spouse does not want to have sex, like ever? Is porn an option? One person asked a great question. If my spouse refuses to have sex with me, is that grounds for divorce from God's perspective? Oh, how would you answer that one? I think tonight's message is pretty huge, huh? So if you think sex is necessary, you're going to turn to porn really quickly, and you're probably going to play that card too soon. Often what happens, have you ever heard me talk about the crazy cycle? I was in a great book I read called Love and Respect. I make a pre-marriage counseling couples refer to that, is where guy doesn't love his wife well, so wife doesn't respect her husband well. Guy feeling disrespected doesn't serve and love his wife. When she feels even more unloved, she feels less inclined to respect him, and it just builds momentum until they're so nauseous in their relationship, they just want out. And oftentimes, when we're both nauseous, we've sinned against each other in this crazy time for seasons, sex is non-existent. And then, a guy will say, well, my wife never wants to have sex with me. Can I get a divorce? And my answer is, well, maybe, but tell me about your marriage first, right? If you're not having sex because you're not consistently loving her well, then I would say no, porn is not an option for sure, never is. Divorce is not an option. I would want to dig into the specifics of the situation and see, is this a one-sided, he is loving her well or she's respecting him well, and the spouse just says, I'm not going to, I don't want to, I'm not even going to try. Paul actually would confront that hard in 1 Corinthians 7. So he said, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Those are the verses I skipped actually in tonight's sermon. Paul says, I say this as a concession and not as a command. I wish that all of you were as I am. Right? So Paul is saying when you make the commitment of marriage, you make a commitment to sexually serving your spouse. And if you're just going to one-sided say, I'm not going to do that anymore, you're breaking your vow. Do you know what 1 Corinthians 7 is also famous for? It's the only spot in the Bible that says that besides adultery, there are other reasons a Christian could get divorced without sinning. And Paul basically says if someone unrepentantly refuses to keep their vow, he says if the unbeliever leaves, deserts the promise they made, let it be so. The brother or sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. So if anyone said in a marriage that they were just not going to do what they vowed to do, they're not sorry for it, they plan on continuing it, I would actually say to a Christian, you could leave your marriage because they have abandoned their vow and their commitment to, and they're not living as a Christian should. Is porn ever an option? Never. Well, most seasons, or a lot of seasons in marriage, cause us to take up our cross and find satisfaction in God while we repair things? Absolutely. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7 should be your go-to. What if someone doesn't want to have sex? Let me say one last thing on that. There are a lot of people, I've met a number of men like this, who will use that passage as a weapon to try to force their wife into sex when they're not loving her well. And I would say, bro, before we talk about your bedroom, we need to talk about your heart. There are passages in the Bible that say a wife should respect and submit to her husband, and a husband should love their wife. But if in marriage we're using those passages to force someone to serve us, we're actually being selfish. So John and Lacey here are going through my pre-marriage. We're meeting on Sunday again, right? All right, I'm going to tell John pretty bluntly, the passage that a wife should respect her husband is not for John to read, memorize, and quote often. His job is to read what comes after that. A husband should love his wife and give up everything for her. So we have to be really careful we don't use 1 Corinthians 7 as a club to force someone into sex when we're really not connected with them because we're not loving and serving them well.